Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Welcome to the GSMC Football Podcast, hosted by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Ethan Orfe, alongside co-host Brice Lewis. And we just got finished watching the Green Bay Packers versus the Minnesota Vikings Monday night game. Green Bay takes this victory 23-10 in a very, very decisive win. What are your thoughts, Brice? How do you feel about the game?
Well, watching this game, what this tells you is two things. That the Packers, one thing about the Packers is a lot of people say that they're a finesse team. They can't play in a very physical ball game. Minnesota is known as a physical team, especially on defense. And today, they out-physical Minnesota today. They ran on them, and then they were able to move the ball methodically down the field multiple times. They were 20-plus in terms of plays ran. Also, they were about 10-plus in time of possession. So the Packers have dominated this game from start to finish for the most part. Outside of an early field goal and a touchdown by Minnesota, really that was really it for Minnesota's offense. And this also showed that Kirk Cousins again just does not look good in prime time. He's still never won a game in Monday Night Football that he's played in, and it's just making you just feel like, you know, this team is limited. They have all the talent in the world. They have two great receivers. They have Dalvin Cook, even though he didn't play tonight. They have Dalvin Cook. They have one of the better defenses in the NFL, and yet they're not able to win these types of games. And I think this is because a lot of people don't look at Kirk Cousins as the person who's limiting them from moving forward and being able to rise up in succession in the leaderboards in the NFC. I think that, you know, this game, if you watch it, it's one of those games where it's just like, now that the Packers have won the division, the NFC North, the matchups, for the most part, outside of what happens in the Seattle game in 49ers, the matchups are more than likely set. Obviously, if some things happen, a couple of seed changes, but you got your 6 teams. Minnesota is going to be the 6th seed, and it presents potential playoff matchups now that could potentially happen. And if the Minnesota Vikings play like they did tonight, you can expect a very early exit in the playoffs and the wild card round, especially if they have a matchup looming with either the Saints, who probably will be the team they end up facing, or potentially if the Saints lost last week, or the Saints win next week and the Packers lose, then they would play the Packers for a third time. So, it doesn't look good in either matchup. The Packers have beat Minnesota twice this year now. They've swept them. So clearly we look at that matchup and think the Packers are the better team by far. And then you would think the Saints would still be able to handle business, because at the end of the day, just no one really trusts Kirk Cousins, and Kirk Cousins showed again tonight why you can't trust him in big games. We thought maybe he had turned a little leaf when he played Seattle on Monday night, and he had played one of his best games of the year. But this game makes you come back down to earth and think, wow, they're still a quarterback away for a lot of people. Probably a lot of Minnesota fans were probably going home very disappointed today, and it's one of those things where, congratulations to the Packers winning the NFC North. They've played well all season. They found a resurgence in the running game. Rodgers hasn't had to be what Rodgers has been the last few years for them to be successful. So, just like I said, congratulations to them. What about you, Ethan? What was your thoughts on the Monday night game tonight?
I think that Minnesota's defense is really good. I think their defense did a good job of containing Rodgers, especially early on in the first half. But when you don't have Dalvin Cook, it looks like Kirk Cousins is not the same quarterback, and you're asking him to do stuff that he just isn't capable of doing. I don't think he's capable of bringing somebody a win. He is not Aaron Rodgers, not a Drew Brees. He's not a Tom Brady. He's not Lamar Jackson. He's not a Patrick Mahomes. He is a Kirk Cousins. And he is a fine quarterback. You don't need an elite quarterback to win games in the NFL, but you do need somebody who is able to manage a game and get you to the best possible outcome or the best possible way to win a game. And Kirk Cousins just was not good tonight. And it wasn't that he was playing too safe. He just wasn't making the right reads at the right times. He was taking too long to throw the ball. And when he did throw the ball, it wasn't as accurate as you'd hope. There were some drops, of course. Not everything is on him, I wouldn't say. But the offensive line did not help him out tonight, as Green Bay's defense really got after him, especially in the front four. And they just tore him up all night long. So when you look at it from that standpoint, without having a really consistent run game, because no Dalvin Cook, so the pressure is all on Kirk Cousins to throw the ball, what more do you really want him to do with this sort of situation, which we've known Kirk Cousins for, 6 years now, that this is just not something he is favorable for. It's not the football that he likes to play, and it doesn't look like the football that Mike Zimmer wants him to get into. He wants Kirk Cousins to be able to make quick decisions and make the right decision, and this was the type of game that you need more of a playmaker rather than a game manager, and Kirk Cousins isn't a playmaker. He's more of a game manager. And as far as Green Bay is concerned, I think this was a good win for Green Bay in the sense that it puts them on top. It gives them a bye week as long as they handle business next week. However, I don't think that this game means that they are still in the upper echelon of the NFC as far as just better than the 49ers or better than the Saints. I think that this team really is interesting on the sense of they aren't game busters on offense. They run the ball a lot with Aaron Jones, and when Aaron Jones is hot, they are a hard team to kind of put down just because Aaron Rodgers is still really good at football. But he is not the make magic Aaron Rodgers like he was 2 years ago or even a year ago a little bit. He is a bit slowed down, maybe due to age, but it just doesn't seem like the ball is coming out the same way. He doesn't feel like he has the same zip on the ball, and I think that's just something to look at. If they have to get into a shootout with a team, I'm not too sure if they're going to be able to keep up. And I'm really not too sure if that defense is as good as they displayed tonight, just because Minnesota's whole offense really does revolve around Dalvin Cook getting out there and doing his thing. And when you don't have a key piece, it really does hurt the scheme that you make against a team. So we're going to really have to just wait and see if Green Bay is as real as their record says they are. And you know the cliche is you are what your record says you are. So for right now, we just have to assume that they are a good 12-3 team and they're going to make some noise in the playoffs. But I would be kind of cautious looking at them further on, as they're going to face harder competition and better offenses and better game plans and honestly better just offensive schemes all around and better players to just see what that defense can really handle, because I'm not too sure if they can handle a really, really dynamic, versatile offense rather than a traditional run the football, play action that the Vikings just typically are, and they've shown to stay that sort of way since they've gotten Kirk Cousins in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. I understand what you're saying. I mean, if we're looking ahead, right now, looking at the current playoff standings, right now, the Packers would have a bye week, and the Saints would play the Vikings in the first round of the playoffs. How do you feel about that matchup if this is actually how the standings end up with that first wild card game?
I feel like if that's the case, it'll be a tough game for the Saints just because of legacy issues of the whole idea of they can't play outdoors, or specifically Drew Brees has bad games outdoors. But I'd argue that the whole idea of home field advantage has been a little bit weird this season. It doesn't seem like teams that play at home have had the best advantage. In fact, there are some metrics around that showcase that road teams in the past, I guess, hundreds so odd games have had the better record. And Vegas seems to agree with that as well. So a lot of teams have home advantage has actually not mattered as much. And I don't really know what that is. Maybe it's due to traveling or ticket prices are too high for like the really, really interesting fans. It's interesting as the word to come into the games and cause some havoc for the opposing teams. But yeah, we're going to go ahead and get into a quick break. And coming up after that break, we're going to talk about some general NFL news from Sunday and Saturday as far as how those games went and what we felt about them. Coming up.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast, where first segment we talked about the Monday night game, Minnesota versus Green Bay. And now we're going to go into what happened over the weekend on Saturday and Sunday. So, Brice, how about you go ahead and get us started?
Yeah, there was a lot of big games this past weekend. A lot of big games have happened for playoff implications. One of the biggest games of the weekend was Bills and Patriots. As the Patriots came away with the 24-17 victory over the Bills, which clinched the AFC East for the New England Patriots for another year in a row. Also, this gives Tom Brady 12 consecutive seasons of 12 wins and guarantees they're probably, more than likely, if they don't fumble it next week, they're going to be the second seed in the AFC. Now, they play Miami next week, so a lot of people may chalk it up as a victory, but if they did lose that game and Kansas City did win next week, they would end up being the 2 seed and the Patriots be the 3 seed. But that was one of the big games of the weekend in terms of playoff seeding. Also, another big game that passed this past weekend that had to do with playoff seeding was the Saints and the Tennessee Titans. Tennessee needed this game with Pittsburgh actually ending up losing to the New York Jets. If they had won that game, they would have ended up with the 6th seed in the AFC. But now, since Tennessee had lost that game to the Saints now still have a chance to be the 2nd seed. And also, Tennessee is still looking in at the playoffs instead of being in the playoffs right now. So that was a big game in that respect. Coming out of that game, though, we have to keep in mind that the Tennessee Titans did not have Derrick Henry in that game. But he will be back for the game next week against Houston, which we think Houston's going to play that game starters to the end. But we'll have to see what the final decisions are made. And also, Baltimore defeated Cleveland this past weekend and clinched the number 1 seed in the AFC. So home field advantage will go through Baltimore, which is a very tough place to play. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Lamar Jackson being in this situation for the first time in his career, being in the number 1 seed, and basically now having the entire playoffs go through Baltimore, trying to lead them to the Super Bowl and then potentially win a Super Bowl in a very tough AFC, I believe. So that's definitely something that stood out this weekend in a couple of games. What other games, Ethan, did happen this weekend that kind of stood out to you?
One game that you mentioned, the Chiefs game, was pretty interesting because it looks like Mahomes has his swagger back. Not to say he's been playing horrible in recent weeks. It's just more so he doesn't look like the guy from last year. And that's generally because of chemistry. A lot of guys have been in and out of the lineup. He has been in and out of the lineup in his own right. And he looked like he got his swagger back. He was taunting the Chicago Bears, I guess, their sideline, doing the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, because, he only has 10 fingers. But 10 people were picked ahead of him, one of them being the Bears. And the person that they picked ahead of Pat Mahomes was, in fact, who was that, Brice?
It was Mitchell Trubisky.
Right, Mr. Trubisky, who did not look good in that game last night. And the Bears have not looked good in a good few weeks. Mm-hmm. And honestly, this might be a thing that people in the AFC, big teams that are going into the playoffs, should be quite worried about, because the Chiefs have been rolling on defense, not just offense. We already knew their offense was dynamic and could score. And if they did start a little bit slow, you never know when they're going to get hot again. They have one of the best tight ends in the game, the best deep threat in the game, and a plethora of good wide receivers and running backs as weapons. But that defense has been stopping people, because when it first came into the season, it was not the best. It was giving up a lot of points, couldn't defend anybody, no pass rush. And now they have a pass rush. Things are starting to heat up for them at the right time as they're about to go into this playoff run. And if I was someone like the Ravens or the Patriots especially, because the Patriots defense has not been its A+ self of recent. It looks like it's more like A-, as they are not as completely shut down as they were early on in the season. And nobody really is in the NFL anymore. Defenses start to figure out who they are as the season goes along. And when you start off hot, sometimes it's injuries, sometimes it's people coming in and out of the lineups and inconsistencies, or maybe schedule can hide a lot of things. And the Patriots they're still a really good defense. They're just not the super shutdown, potentially all-time great defense as they were projected to be in the earlier parts of the season. All that being said, the Chiefs' defense is looking to be molding into a good championship-style defense, as they do just enough to get Pat Mahomes the ball and let him do the things that he does best. But as far as game of the week, I really enjoyed watching that Eagles-Cowboys game, as that was a big playoff implication game that ended up doing a lot for the Eagles as far as the playoff hunt. They are on top of the NFC East division right now, and the Cowboys are now in the hunt trying to get into the playoffs. They have to win, and they have to have a lot of things happen for them, in particular, to get in. But it is not looking good on their part, and they had all the chances to make their own destiny, but that just didn't happen on Sunday.
Can I bounce off your point with Kansas City?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just in case everybody forgot, in the regular season, Lamar Jackson against the Chiefs is 0-2. Against everybody else, Lamar Jackson, as a starting quarterback in the regular season, I believe, has only lost once in the regular season to anybody, which was the Cleveland Browns earlier this year. Because when he came in last year, I believe he was undefeated coming in to his starts, and then he lost the playoff game to San Diego. But both other losses that he got was to the Kansas City Chiefs. So the Chiefs have clearly been Baltimore's kryptonite late, because the Chiefs can get into high-scoring games with the Ravens, and they also can get into defensive games with the Ravens now that their defense is up to par. So that's definitely a matchup of the Chiefs, since they would end up being the third seed if they don't move up. Now, if they win their playoff matchup, they will play New England in the divisional. And if they beat New England and Baltimore wins their game, that's going to set up for a very highly anticipated AFC championship matchup. But go ahead and continue on, Ethan.
My last point, should I say, is about the Saints offense clicking on all cylinders. And I think that is, when you looked at the Saints even from a year ago or 2 years ago, we all knew that Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, Drew Brees, those guys were elite players and elite offense, and they could score a lot of points. But we didn't have that, I guess, that third guy outside of Drew Brees, the third guy for his weapons. For about a few years now, we've been looking at people like Traquan Smith, the inconsistent play of, our number 2 receivers and other people like that just never stuck around. But the emergence of the chemistry with Jared Cook and Drew Brees has taken this offense to a whole nother level, and it's making them look scarier on paper than it did weeks prior. Prior, it would look like it would be if you couldn't get the ball to Michael Thomas, and Alvin Kamara was getting shut down a bit in a few weeks. It looked like the Saints couldn't really move the ball consistently. But if Jared Cook stays healthy and in the lineup, just the way they've been using him, it really reminds me of how Jimmy Graham used to be used back in the day when he used to play for the Saints. And that's all really I have to say on that. It's just something interesting to look at, as I don't think anybody in the NFC can really stop him. Even when they played the 49ers before he got the concussion, he was touching the ball at least 5 times and had 2 touchdowns basically in that game in the first quarter. But we're going to take a quick break, and coming back, we're going to go into some more NFC East conversations, why the Cowboys might need to move away from Jason Garrett, and just how hurt really are the Eagles. That's coming right up.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast, where last segment we talked about what was going on in the games on Saturday and Sunday, and now we're going to get into some divisional specific outcomes, specifically in the NFC East. Brice, how about you go ahead and get us started?
The Philadelphia Eagles defeated the Dallas Cowboys 17-9 yesterday in a game where the Cowboys did not play their best game. Ezekiel Elliott and Amari Cooper were calling out in very crucial parts of the game, and the Eagles down 3 of their top offensive weapons. Zach Ertz getting an injury to his ribs early in the game, and just, a lot of things seemed like they were against the Eagles team, but coming out on top because of Carson Wentz and Miles Sanders willing them to victory. I think the Philadelphia Eagles have, basically, if they can handle business next Sunday against the New York Giants, are going to the playoffs, and they're going to win the NFC East for another year for the franchise that, they've been, this game really was big for, Carson Wentz, because he's never really been in this situation before. He's never been in this pressure situation, because the last 2 years he's been hurt at the end of the year, which has kept him from being in these situations. And so, I think it's great for him to come back. He's put the team on his back the last 3 games, having very great fourth-quarter performances in the last 3 games, and providing the spark that this team needed so they can get this victory. But it's also probably very disappointing from the Dallas side. Don't you agree, Ethan?
The Dallas side is it's a weird scenario. I don't know what's going to happen with them if they don't make it to the playoffs. But the Eagles are super hurt, and they're kind of getting players off the scrap heap, so to speak. They're just pulling anybody who can suit up and play at certain positions, especially at the wide receiver position. So it's really been a lot of magical stuff coming from their quarterback. So you really can't judge the Eagles too much beyond that. We know what they are. They are a really, really hurt team, but they're fighting hard and they're trying. And I think a lot of their fans should be able to support the fact that they are definitely trying. They could have sat Ertz, they could have sat Carson Wentz, they could have called this whole thing a season a few weeks ago. And it looked like that might have been the case because it was getting really dire for the Eagles, and now they have a playoff chance, and all because they didn't give up hope, and they won the games they were supposed to, and they fought tooth and nail to get to where they are. And on the flip side, we have Dallas, who has all the talent in the world, the metrics on their side, and they still can't seem to pull it all together when they need it most, especially a game against their division rival. And it just doesn't seem to make sense. I don't understand how Amari Cooper and Randall Cobb, was it, that were subbed out on that last play, which basically sealed the deal for the Cowboys to lose that game. And I'm just not figuring out what's going to get them into the playoffs now. This is like the most disappointing thing I've seen from the Cowboys since watching football, really. This is the culmination of all the things that have been generational problems for the Cowboys in this decade, all in one game. It's just, you're not using Ezekiel Elliott the best way possible. Dak is throwing hurt, and he's trying to make some things happen, but it's not working out for him. Amari Cooper doesn't look like he's 100% at times, and he has some weird road and home splits versus his stats that are kind of staggering. So you really don't know what to believe. Old man Jason Witten is still out there, but he's still not who he once was back in his prime. And we all know Dallas has a pretty good defense, but they're just so inconsistent. You never know. It's like Jekyll and Hyde almost of what's going to come out and what's not. Just a week ago, we were talking about how they tore up the Rams, right? The Rams were a really good team coming into that game, and that was the game where the Rams were coming off a win that seemed pretty good, and we wanted to see what they could do. And it's almost like if both teams are in similar mindset positions where 1 week they're really good and 1 week they look like they're in the bottom half of the league. And I'm not really too sure what the answer is. A lot of people are pointing at this might be Jason Garrett's last ride. And I would tend to agree with that notion just because something has to change. I don't know if it's the players. I don't think you change the players. You have good players. They've done really well in the draft. They've done well when they could sign some free agents and trading. Of course, traded for Amari Cooper, and that seemed to work out for them. What more can you really ask? And maybe you've reached the point where Jason Garrett is no longer viable anymore. You need somebody else to put in that position to get you over that hump, because there's not that many people on talent-wise that are better than the Cowboys, and their talent is not being shown on display on a weekly basis, and that has to be disappointing for people, especially for Jerry Jones, the owner.
Yeah, definitely. And back to your point about, this decade about to come to an end, and, Garrett, this is a sum and a culmination of everything that's happened to the Cowboys. Let's not forget, Garrett was hired in his first full year was in 2011, and they were 7-4 in December, lost the last, I believe, 4 games, the last 4 games, and lost a big divisional game. And the next year, it was the same thing. They finished 8-8. They lost a big divisional game at the end. And under Garrett, when they've been in those big divisional games, they've basically lost every time this decade. I mean, this decade has been just surrounded by the Cowboys losing big games. Unless they win the division outright, like they did with Romo and Murray, and then the first year of the Zach and Dak attack, it hasn't been there for the Cowboys at all. They've struggled to close these types of games out. I do think it's Jason Garrett. I think he just isn't a detailed enough coach, in my opinion, to figure out the strengths of his team and to execute them. If he has to figure out how to get them to play better, it's not his strength. If they're just playing good because of the talent, then it's easy. That's why the years they were great, it was just like, well, we have a better offensive line and a better running back than all of you, so we can just kind of go ahead and just do that, and it works every week. But the problem is now if teams are kind of stopping it, you have injuries, stuff is going on with the team. When it comes to that, Jason Garrett seems to struggle with trying to get his players to play at a high level and still be able to compete at a high level, even with different things happening. And the reason why this game was also so bad is that they were going against an undermanned team and they were fully healthy. Now, yes, players were banged up, but everybody's banged up at this point in the season. And this was just very disappointing for them because they had so much riding on this game and they just failed again. And I feel like going into the new decade, they need to fire Jason Garrett and go in a new direction. Because really, this is hurting a lot of people. And listen, Jerry Jones deserves the most blame for this because he's kept Jason Garrett around. Because like some people believe that he keeps him around just to be a puppet. Because he doesn't want a coach who's going to enforce his will and say, this is what I want and this is what's best for the team because Jerry Jones wants the credit. And I feel like that's why a lot of this is also on him. Because he has to go out of his way and sometimes take himself out of the picture and put a coach who knows what he's doing into the picture to get the maximum amount out of this team. Because right now, Jerry Jones isn't looking that great also because DeMarcus Lawrence was completely disappeared and he's the highest paid Cowboy in Cowboy history. And he did not show up in the biggest game. And Ezekiel Elliott, since he got his deal, has not looked like the same running back. He still put up good numbers, but it just hasn't had that same impact as he had in previous years. So there's a lot of things that the Cowboys have to fix, and we still have to go into the offseason with Dak still wanting to get paid. And the end of the season, it's not helping him. It's not helping him. And Amari Cooper, yesterday's game did not help Amari Cooper when it comes to get paid. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens when it comes to paying these players and trying to get everybody together because, you know, right now the Cowboys just have a lot of changes that need to be made, and it's going to take a lot for them to figure it out. But I think if Jerry Jones is willing to reflect and really look back on things, I think he'll be able to correct the issues that they have and build this team in the right direction. Because like you said, they have talent. There is no reason why they should be finishing potentially under 500 if they got upset by Washington. And with the talent that they have, there's just no excuse for it. You know what I'm saying?
Right, and that's just another thing that, first of all, Dak is still going to get paid. And I think that's kind of a done deal at this point. He's going to get close to whatever max dollars is in football for the quarterback at that rate. And he's going to get his money. Amari Cooper is going to get his money no matter if he stays on the Cowboys or not. At this point, it's figuring out who is going to build a culture around that team to win big-time football games. Not games that they're supposed to win, but the games that are tester games. They don't win the games that are supposed to test them, and that's the problem. So we're going to go into a quick break, but coming up next, we're going to go over some general NFL news, some injury report stuff. We're going to look at the AFC bottom playoff picture, and we're going to talk about some Marshawn Lynch return rumors coming up after this break.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast, where in last segment we talked about the NFC East and the struggles of the Eagles on the injury side and struggles of Dallas on the winning big game side. So now we're going to hop around the NFL with some quick fire hit news, some injury report stuff, and a little bit of Marshawn Lynch sightings. Some sightings in Seattle.
Yeah. Beast Mode's supposed to come back. They had a meeting with the Seattle Seahawks, Marshawn Lynch and his people. Obviously, if you weren't aware, yesterday in the games with Seattle, both their top two running backs, Chris Carson and C.J. Prosise, went down. C.J. Prosise went down with a broken forearm, and Chris Carson went down with a hip injury. So they have lost two running backs for the entire season in the playoffs. and they only have one healthy running back right now, which is Travis Homer, which is a rookie. They're definitely going to need running backs coming into the playoffs, and also next week in their big matchup with the 49ers. So I think this is a great idea for them to call Marshawn Lynch back and say, hey, we want you back. We need you. You know, you mean a lot here in Seattle. Everybody would love to have you back. You could help us out for this playoff run. And I don't know what type of shape Marshawn Lynch is in right now, but, I mean, obviously since he's doing this, he must know he's in pretty decent shape to be able to come back and play for Seattle. I think that this is going to be big for them. If he could give them anything that he used to be, then this is a fantastic pickup for the Seattle Seahawks. And they'll probably still sign another running back on top of that just because you still only have two. You might want to still try to get the three running backs and make sure that everything was good on that point of view. So that's some Marshawn Lynch news right there. Any other news, Ethan, around the league?
We're still waiting to hear what the Mark Ingram injury from Sunday was all about. It seemed to be a lower calf injury. I was really worried that he might have actually torn his calf or something because it was non-contact. He just kind of took a step and just fell right over there. Other than that, for the Ravens, I know this reported earlier today that Lamar is not going to play in the last regular season game. So it's safe to assume that we're going to see some RG3 action.
Yes,
and who do they play again?
They are playing they're still playing the Pittsburgh Steelers this week in a big matchup. Big matchup in terms of Pittsburgh because they need this game. They need this game to get into it because we're going to kind of switch a little bit to the last spot in the AFC playoffs, and Pittsburgh needs this game because they're trying to get in. All they have to do is win and they're in, I believe. And I think that this is big because, they can't do a three-way tie because Oakland has the tiebreaker of both Tennessee and Pittsburgh loses this weekend, and then they win. So Pittsburgh needs this game. It's going to be tough, though, because they lost Mason Rudolph. Doug Hodges has not looked the best the last couple of weeks. He has thrown a lot of picks, and he's going against a very good Baltimore defense. Now, we'll have to see how elite they're going to be because we still don't know fully who all they're sitting. I'm sure they're going to sit a couple of their star players, but, they can't sit every starter. And there's going to be some guys that still want to play, plus they'll get a bye week. So I believe that since they clinched number one seed, I believe this will be this probably be the, I don't want to say the easiest game. There's no game that's easy, but this is the most winnable game out of the three AFC teams that are playing for this wild card spot this weekend. And then the other AFC team, Tennessee, they're playing Houston. Houston technically isn't playing for anything. They're in the playoffs. I'm not sure if they won and Kansas City lost, if that would move them up. But if not, they're not really playing for anything. But sometimes in these divisional games, it's kind of one of those games where it's just like, we don't want you to get in. So we're going to play our guys and we're going to try to beat you and keep you out of the playoffs. This game's going to be in Houston, and Tennessee is going to be coming into this game losing two straight after losing the game to the Saints and losing to Houston a couple of weeks ago. But I think they're getting Derrick Henry back for this game, and they're going to be looking to try to get a win to get him into the playoffs. This also will help Ryan Tannehill's case in terms of maybe getting a potential big contract at the end of the year after the season is over. So that's going to be big. And then the Oakland Raiders also have their game this week where they're trying to get into the playoffs. They're trying to make it, because a lot of people, they had an outside chance coming in, but now they have a chance to get into the playoffs. And it's just, that's the only playoff spot really up for grabs. Everything else has been pretty much decided on both sides, except, on the NFC side, it's just who's going to win the division for the NFC East, which right now the Philadelphia Eagles are in the driver's seat right now for that, for the most part.
And let's touch on that Titans thing a little bit, because I think there has been a little bit of, the numbers are telling a little bit of one story, and the actual way the team is playing is telling another. Tennessee is a good team, and I think if, for example, I don't think the Ravens are going to be the first seed regardless, right? But the team that would have to face somebody in the first round, so who would that be? Third seed.
The third seed?
Who are they? I think it's either the Titans or someone's going to see the Bills or the Titans. Or, like, it's between the Titans and the Steelers, really. If the Steelers win, I think they get into the playoffs. And
if the Steelers lose and the Titans win, they get in.
Right.
And if they both lose and Oakland wins, then Oakland gets in.
Yeah, so which team would you rather see? I would much rather see the Steelers because you know their ceiling. You know what they're good at. Offensively, they're not good enough.
You're going to have a hard time scoring against them, but you know if you have a good defense, you'll also not have to worry about them putting up too many points.
Right. So, honestly, I would be kind of concerned about Tennessee. Tennessee is probably going to handle business because I don't think, for one, Houston has not looked the best in the past few weeks, even though they did beat Tennessee a few weeks ago. I don't think that was a tribute to them being better than Tennessee, but it's just a few balls bounced their way. And Ryan Tannehill has played the best football of his professional career, and I think he is going to try and get this team into a good playoff position no matter what happens. I think they're going to come out and win that game, and whatever happens where the chips may fall in that scenario. But if they get in the playoffs, they could definitely make some noise. They, in my opinion, they're probably the third best team in the AFC on a given Sunday, and the only team that are better than them is probably the of course, the Ravens, the Bills, not in any particular order. The Bills are probably third best, and then the Chiefs. Actually, Bills are fourth best. The Chiefs are second, and the Patriots are third, just due to legacy and Bill Belichick. You never know what can happen, and their defense is still really good. But the Bills and the Titans are kind of like a coin flip, and the Texans are probably the sixth, maybe even seventh best team. You might even have the Raiders better than the Texans.
No, the only thing about the Texans, though, is that they have the talent to beat the top teams because of Deshaun Watson and because of the receivers they have. Because if you let them get going on the receiving end, that they can beat you. Now, the Houston's dealing with their own injury problems because Will Fuller's out, again with another injury. And when he's usually in the offense flows better and plays better without him. It's kind of easier to guard everybody. You can kind of switch cover over to DeAndre Hopkins. And Kenny Stills has been in and out of the lineup all year, too. So Houston's a very inconsistent team. You know, they're very inconsistent with their play. That's why Houston can come out and lay a dud, but then they also can go out and beat the Patriots. So it really kind of just depends. And out of all the AFC teams, really, you know, the least scariest team to me and all the teams is, to me, the Patriots, just because there's nothing about them outside of defense that you're just worried about. Like, I honestly feel like the Patriots and the Bills are built the same way. Your offense is limited, but your defense is great. And so you need your defense to get stops and your offense to put up enough points to win. You know? They both have, well, we could say maybe a lack of receivers, maybe. Because, I mean, the best receiver on Buffalo is John Brown. And the best receiver on New England is, what, Mohamed Sanu, maybe? Oh, actually, not Mohamed Sanu. Julian Edelman.
I'm about to say, Mohamed Sanu is, he's a borderline just a blocker at this point. Yeah, he has not caught that many
after
balls.
After Edelman, it's kind of like a drop-off.
Yeah.
And so it's basically they hoping to get some shot plays. The only difference is maybe in the quarterbacks is like Josh Allen's more mobile. He can run with it, where Brady is more, you know, all over the place. But, you know, it'll be interesting to see what happens. It'll be interesting to see what happens when the playoffs do come around, Ethan.
Right. So we're going to take another quick break, and coming up after that break, we're going to talk some college football playoff previews. So we're going to, who do we have for Oklahoma, LSU, and of course the bigger game of the duo, Ohio State versus Clemson, coming right up.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast, where we are talking about some general NFL news, updates, injury reports, and some little bit of Marshawn Lynch returning news last time. So now we're going to get into some college football playoff predictions, looking at the preview of the games. So, Brice, how about you start us off?
Yes, we're going to talk about the Oklahoma-LSU game to start off. In this game, we have two teams, very explosive offenses. Oklahoma is known as one of the best offenses in the nation, and people are calling the LSU offense one of the best offenses in college football in general. You have the Heisman Trophy winner, Joe Burrow, coming into this game, leading LSU to an undefeated record and getting them into the college football players, where Oklahoma has suffered one loss, but has led themselves into the college football playoff, also by having a great showing at the end of the year. This game will come down to, I think a lot of people are going to look at the quarterback matchup between Jalen Hurts and Joe Burrow. One thing Jalen Hurts has the advantage in is that he has experience playing in the college football playoffs when he played with Alabama. This is Joe Burrow's first college football playoffs and LSU's first playoff since the playoffs were created. Obviously, a big question in this game will be Oklahoma's defense, because Oklahoma's defense has always been a question of subject. People have seen what's happened the last couple of years with Oklahoma's defense in the playoffs, being gashed by Georgia, being gashed by Alabama. But at the same time, we forget that Oklahoma has also scored on these teams. So this game's going to come down to, can Oklahoma get enough stops, and can Oklahoma score enough points? Because we feel like LSU is going to score enough points and present to be a very big challenge for the Oklahoma defense. But though Oklahoma's defense has played better this year than they have in previous years, they were the number one defense in the Big 12 this year. So that's big for them. I think this game is going to be. I think this game is actually going to be very competitive. I think this game's going to go down to the fourth quarter. I think that LSU's defenses aren't world beaters either. They can be gashed too. And I think Jalen Hurts is going to make some plays to keep this game close, but I do feel like LSU at the end will be able to create separation, make enough plays down the stretch, and end up winning the game. So how do you feel about the game, Ethan?
I think LSU is going to be pretty dominant on both sides of the ball, because Oklahoma's just down a lot of players. One due to injury in their defensive backfield. Mr. Yell, one of their top safeties, is out, I guess, for the season. He will not be playing with a broken collarbone. And then they have a few suspensions coming into this game. So they're one of their starter DNs that I talked about at the GMC College Football Podcast. He is out with a suspension, along with their running back. Their sophomore running back is also out, and also a wide receiver, Mr. Trajan Bridges. He is also suspended as well. And that's just a lot of pieces around the board that you can't have missing. Football is a game of attrition, and you have to have people at depth. You got to have people, you got to have depth on your team in order to go all the way. And Oklahoma's just not built right now to go all the way. Now, Jalen Hurts has a lot of talent, but I don't know if his talent will be able to amass the SEC dominance that is LSU. LSU went through the gauntlet. The SEC is not as good as it used to be, but they're still pretty good. Mm-hmm. And the conference is still probably the best in college football. So when you look at they went undefeated, they don't have a loss on their record. They beat Alabama, which is always the mark of an LSU season, is if they beat Alabama, they are probably pretty good and they're probably going to good places. So I think LSU has a lot of unfinished business to do, and that is to go out there and win that game. And I think Joe Burrow is a special player, and he's going to get the job done.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with that. Do you think that the fact that Jalen Hurts has familiarity with SEC, he's played against some of these guys at LSU that can maybe potentially help him out, because he's played against a lot of guys who were on the team from last year. Even though he didn't play last year, he was he basically was like in the locker room when they went against him in 2 years ago because some of those players are from the LSU team from 2 years ago, or do you think that's not really going to play too much of a factor here?
I think it's just different scenarios. One, I don't think LSU's not the same team they were last year. Mm-hmm. And neither is Jalen Hurts is not the same player he was last year or maybe 2 years ago. He's in a totally different offense. He's over there with the quarterback guru, which Lincoln Riley, who he just seems to know how to make quarterbacks get the most out of them, right? So offensively, he's different. So it's not a lot of familiarity besides faces and names, in my opinion. They just are two different football teams. He's a different player. Joe Burrow's a much, much different player than he was last year. And that defense has a bunch of people who are much improved from last year. And they're just able to make plays. A lot of players can make plays around that field. So I don't think that familiarity from just I used to play against them in one division or in one conference is going to make a difference anymore. Just because the game is so nuanced and everything is about scheme and matchups. And when you play against someone on Alabama where he used to play, matchups against LSU were different because Alabama had almost a 5-star recruit or a 4-star at every position in the game. Oklahoma doesn't have that at every position in the game now. They have good players, but especially now with a lot of people missing on the first in the first game, you just don't have that same level of talent. And I think LSU's just sheer amount of talent and just the way they can score the football, it's going to overcome them, really.
Yeah. And now going into the next game, Clemson and Ohio State. Who you have in that game? I'm going to go with Ohio State. A lot of people are picking Clemson because they feel like Clemson has really found their stride down the stretch and they're playing great football right now, which they are. But I just feel like Ohio State is one of the most complete teams in the playoff. I feel like defensively they have an elite defensive player. They have an elite offensive player. They have good players at every position. They have great coaching. I feel like Ohio State is also hearing that. A lot of people think that Clemson's going to beat them and that they don't stand a chance. And they're just like, wait, we went undefeated. We beat all the top Big Ten teams. Why are we not getting the same respect when Clemson hasn't played anybody? But, Ethan, what do you think about that?
Well, I am also one of those people who might see a Clemson upset only because I see it from this perspective, right? I was talking about this earlier this week where Clemson has gone under the radar and figured out how to refine their mistakes that they had early on in the season. And they were a team that a lot of people were high on coming into the season due to the play of Trevor Lawrence and that offense and that defensive front and Dabo Swinney out there and just doing a whole bunch of stuff. And now they've refined it. They sharpened the iron. And it was under the radar. So, yeah, they were beating up on less talented teams, but they were doing so in the way they can only play who they have on their schedule. Mm-hmm. And if the ACC is weak, that's not really their fault. And even then, they're doing it dominantly. The ACC championship game was a drug of a game. They beat the brakes off of that team, and it wasn't even close. And that was a good team. Virginia's a good team, and they beat the brakes off of them, right? Mm-hmm. So let's look at it from this perspective, right? Last year, they went up against Ohio State, I believe, and they won 31-0. Now, different teams, different quarterback. However, Clemson has been to the big dance 2 years in a row. They know what it takes to get there. They know what they're looking at. Trevor Lawrence has already been there. He's not going to be afraid of the moment. So I'm not saying that Ohio State fans or the team don't have a right to say they should feel slighted. Of course they should. They're the best team in college football on paper and in action. However, we should really look at the fact that maybe they're underestimating just how good Clemson has become over the last few weeks, really finding their stride and being able to put together a run and stay hot and consistent. And offensively, I don't think Ohio State has faced a team as good as Clemson, and it's going to be a really big test for them to see if their defense can hold up, because there's been some stats that say Chase Young hasn't been as good against some really good offensive teams that they've faced in the past. So I would say look out for Clemson. and I might be interested in picking them to come out in that game and see them go up against someone like LSU.
Well, I think ideally, if you're the committee, the biggest game you feel like you could potentially have is Clemson and LSU. But I think it'll be a great game regardless. I think both teams are going to – but every team deserves to be in the playoff, and it'll be exciting to see what happens.
Right. So we're going to take one more quick break, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to have a little bit of fun. We're going to talk about our top offensive player of the decade in the NFL. Coming right up.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast, where last time before the break we talked about some college football game predictions. Who do we think is going to come out on top? Why we think some matchups might be a little bit more even than others. And now we're going to have some fun to end the show with some best offensive players of the last decade. So 2010 to 2020. Brice, give me some players on the top of your list. Who do you have? You don't have to give me your favorite because I know it's kind of tough, or it's not really you can be a favorite list because everything's preference because all these players are really good. But shoot some players my way.
Okay. Well, y'all might think I'm a little homer for this, but first guy I'm going to go with is Julio Jones. Julio Jones was drafted, I believe, in 2011 by the Atlanta Falcons, and ever since he's stepped into the league, he has been one of the top receivers in the game since then. He's still going strong. Just yesterday, he reached a milestone. I believe it was 12,000 yards, the quickest to 12,000 yards as a receiver.
That is unreal.
Yeah, in NFL history. People like to get on Julio for the touchdowns, but I've always looked at the way that they've played, and I think that's what makes him kind of what a great receiver. You know, he doesn't have to score the touchdowns, and it's not even because they don't want him to. It's just he's such a threat that you're going to put coverages on Julio, and everybody else can get it. Everybody else can get their points, and they can get touchdowns, and Julio is still going to get his production. Julio may not score a touchdown, but he'll get 6 catches for 120 yards. So he's still going to make an impact in the game in some capacity. He's probably one of the most reliable receivers also in the league. And I think that Julio is just a guy who definitely, you know, I think he's going to be a Hall of Famer one day. I can never forget that performance he had a couple of years ago. I want to say it was 2016 when he played the Carolina Panthers. And he had over 300 yards receiving in that game and had 2 touchdowns. That was one of the greatest games that a receiver has ever played. You know, he single-handedly destroyed a secondary and single-handedly he put a cornerback out of a job. So,
oh my God.
Yeah, Julio is, that's why they call him the Jet. That's why he's loved in Atlanta. How about you, Ethan? Who's somebody you think?
Oh man, it's hard to get up after that one. I'm not gonna go quarterback just yet because I think that's a little bit easier. Mm-hmm. I think that we forget how good Calvin Johnson really was. Calvin Johnson was the scariest matchup problem in the NFL for like 6 straight years, and no one really talks about it anymore. I remember the last time we actually spoke about Calvin Johnson even coming back to the league, he said that if it's not the Patriots, he's not coming back. So if that tells you anything, that man was a matchup nightmare. He literally was like a tight end playing wide receiver. Any ball that was a jump ball, he could go up and get it. He was just really good and just a problem. He was a problem on the field. And there was nobody out there to cause a solution for it. And it really sucks to see that his career didn't really go the way that as long as it should have, and it didn't go anywhere in the playoffs deeply, just because the Lions were a team that kind of struggled to put stuff around him and Matthew Stafford, of course. So I think another player that I would think has a running for best player of the decade, I'm gonna go ahead and say for longevity purposes, Larry Fitzgerald was really good. Like, he still is pretty good to still be playing. Like, he's still productive now. He's not
he's not the number one guy anymore, but he's still pretty involved in the offense.
When he was on it, he literally was the Michael Thomas before Michael Thomas, really, when it comes to catching that football. And he was just electric back in the day. Maybe LaDainian Tomlinson, I was saying, he might have retired a bit too early for it to say be a best player of the decade. But when he was on it, he was on it. I guess we got to go into quarterbacks now, huh?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of... Well, no. When did Troy Polamalu retire?
He retired like 2011, 2010.
Oh, I see. So he retired basically after their last Super Bowl?
Yes, I believe so, yes.
Okay. And Ray Lewis retired in
2015.
So that's kind of the
defensive side.
Yeah, I'd say to qualify, you had to retire probably by 2016, 2017 to really qualify. So I guess we can throw Gronk in there.
Yeah, Gronk.
He's definitely the best tight end of the decade.
Definitely.
It's not even really close.
Earlier in the decade, you could say kind of that Tony Gonzalez couple of years stretch with the Falcons.
Yeah.
But, outside of that, Gronk by far.
Odell kind of teetered off a bit as far as his contention.
Had plenty of.
He's definitely talented. He's probably the most talented player in the decade that we've seen. Because when he first started out, he was so dynamic.
You don't want to put AB in there, Antonio Brown?
No, he's definitely in there. It's just he's definitely in there. As much stuff that gets reported about him, his talent is undeniable. He's probably the second most talented wide receiver to come out in the last 10 years. Let's see. Do you got any running backs you can think of?
Oh, man. I mean, if you really want me to start off in the early 2010s, I'm not going to go there. I was going to give an old classic name. Y'all wouldn't consider him one of the best. But,
you going to say Michael Turner? Probably?
Oh, yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. I was going to say Michael the Birdie Turner, but I'm not going to say him.
The bowling ball.
That man was a fullback playing running back. But, did you already say Adrian Peterson?
No, oh yeah, I haven't. So that should have been the obvious choice, right?
Was the guy. Remember when he almost had 2,000, broke record for 2,000 yards, and they decided I think they threw it instead of run it, and they were just like, why did you run the ball, let him break the record?
I think they didn't know, yeah. I remember watching that game live. That was like right before the playoffs.
Yeah, Adrian Peterson definitely. He's still playing now. Like, Adrian Peterson's not retired. Like, he's still playing. He has some good games. He's a guy you can bring in as a rotation running back.
He's like the Frank Gore if Frank Gore had the clout.
Yeah, because Frank Gore was never as popular, but he was consistent. He always had good years. You knew you can get consistent running. He's an old school kind of back. Frank Gore, you got to put him in there just for his longevity reasons.
Yeah, it is crazy that Adrian Peterson is still playing in a day and age where if you can't catch out the backfield, you kind of squander yourself especially from the big dollars of being a running back. So someone like Adrian Peterson, who has notoriously been known to not be able to catch or block, is still in the league producing, is kind of ridiculous. And he's definitely one of the top players to ever play that position.
I definitely think if we're going to get into quarterbacks that I want to give some love to Russell Wilson.
Yeah.
Because Russell Wilson came into the league as a third-round pick, I believe, was not projected to start over Matt Flynn at the time, and won the job in preseason from a guy that they just paid a bunch of money to.
Yeah, they paid him like $90 million? Or like 70-something million?
Something like that, like over 3 years.
Yeah.
They were going to pay him a lot of money, and he lost the job to a rookie third-round pick. And ever since then, Russell Wilson has always been an excellent quarterback. He wasn't given the credit early because of Legion of Boone and Marshawn Lynch, but he was definitely a catalyst. He's never had. Could you ever say that Russell Wilson ever had a bad year? We can kind of say everybody's kind of had a down year or a bad year, but has Russell Wilson ever had a bad year or a down year? Even the greats. Peyton's had a bad year. Matt Ryan's had a bad year. Cam's had a bad year. Maybe you may want to say maybe earlier San Diego Drew Brees maybe had a bad year. Or not a down year. But Russell has been very consistent. And then when the Legion of Boom started expanding, he got even better. He put up better numbers. With the weapons, Russell Wilson has never had elite receivers. He's had what some people consider top number 2 receivers, and a bunch of just guys, and he's always been able to produce. He's always been able to put up big numbers. He's always been able to make plays. And that's why Russell Wilson's one of the best quarterbacks, I think, of the 2010s, why he will probably be a Hall of Famer. And I think, and he's also a Super Bowl champion. And, that's why today the Seattle Seahawks are still one of the top teams in the NFL because of Russell Wilson. It went from Legion of Boom to Russell Wilson dependent because Russell Wilson has pretty much shown that he is one of the top guys, even though he never gets the same recognition as a Brady or a Breeze gets,
Right. And just to throw out the real typical names, of course, Brady is probably on the top of a lot of people's list due to Super Bowl wins and stats and all that. Aaron Rodgers is probably in the conversation. Drew Brees is definitely someone to just by sheer number of every year he breaks a record. So you have to kind of
didn't Drew Brees get like that when he threw for 5,000 yards? Didn't he break the single season passing?
He's broke it like yards? Twice. He's broke it like a few times actually.
This man, Drew Brees is. And wasn't this during the years where y'all really weren't that great? It's like y'all were 7-9.
These were the 7 and 9 years.
The years where the offense would average like 35 a game and still be 7 and 9.
I'm glad that someone else realizes that if Drew Brees had some defense, there would be a lot more rings on the table.
Exactly.
But we're gonna go ahead and end the podcast on that note. Thank you for listening to the GMC Football Podcast, hosted by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would encourage you to all to leave a nice review, leave us 5 stars, and like and share the podcast on all of our platforms. And also, please follow us on all the social media that we have, which is Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And have a good day. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.